listening to Nightwatch, a Jackalope Media production, with your hosts, Todd Sheets, Hugh McClanahan, and Chris Watsbach. And welcome back to Nightwatch. I'm your host, as always, Todd Sheets, here with no Hugh or no Chris at the moment. Hugh is off dancing in Scotland somewhere with his kilt.
Sausages.
And Chris has been abducted again.
Why am I here?
Yes, Chris has been abducted, but I'm still here, ready to have a wonderful time with all of you, all of my friends out there. It's a wonderful day and evening, and it's going to be, depending on what part of the world you're in, I guess. It's day or evening. But for me, of course, it's the darkness. I'm enjoying myself here in the studio. So we're going to get started. Our next guest is pretty special. It's pretty exciting because she hasn't done an interview in a long, long time. And we were granted this exclusive interview and this privilege, really, to talk to her. Zeena Schreck is an artist, musician, author, and animal rights activist in the mystical tradition. She's a leader of the Setian liberation movement and provides spiritual instruction to students of all denominations. Before converting to Tantric Buddhism in the Karma Kaju League, Zeena was one of the most iconic figures in the modern history of black magic. Two of her short fiction stories are in this month's religion issue of the literary journal Beatdom, and her website is zeena.eu. Everybody, welcome to the show, Zeena Schreck.
Thanks very much. That's very kind of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And I know that there's a pretty interesting story on how we got you here in the first place. I know our producer, Amanda, who's going to chime in here, was out scouring the internet because of what reason, Amanda? What were you doing?
Well, this is funny, and people are going to make fun of me. But I make skins for people who live in virtual worlds.
Now, hold on, skins. What are you, like Leatherface? You're
I'm
sewing
like
together.
Leatherface. No, it's like people have these little avatars in these little worlds, and I just make them look really real. They put them on, and they look like real people running around in there.
So these are basically like little the patterns that you put on.
Yeah, they're like little human skin patterns that I make up in Photoshop, and people buy them from me.
Okay.
And there's one place I went, and people were buying them there, and there was a problem, and I was like looking at their profile, and they were talking about how they role play a vampire thing. It's White Wolf. What is it?
Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah,
is
there is a
about?
Vampire the Masquerade, and they have like 500 followers in their group of these people who worship Set. It's what it is like an Egyptian vampire group. And so I was like, I wonder if that's really real, because I was talking and they're like, oh yeah, we're all over the world.
It's in Conan too. Remember the original Conan?
Yes. And that's what another thing is. I remember watching Conan and the snakes and things, and I was like, hey, maybe there's something to it. And they're like, yeah, it's real. We're real. And I'm like, oh. And so I went and I started.
Of course, I've been chased around by people that are part of Vampire the Masquerade, trying to anoint my blood or their sword with my blood. So I don't know.
See, that's just.
That was kind of odd.
Yeah. So I started Googling, and I ran into Zeena.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it turned out it really is real.
Yeah. Well, not like that, though.
Well, it's not like,
She'll clear that part up for us.
Good. Yeah. I don't want to be chased around.
Yeah, because like I was talking to the girl who did the skin thing with me, bought the skin, and she's like, yeah, my real life is really hard because the Malkavians are chasing me around in real life now. And I'm like, oh, well, I have to go.
Yeah, that's kind of something. Well, Zeena, why don't you tell us a little bit about us, the Setian liberation movement?
Okay, well, I'm sorry to say it's certainly not a role-playing game. But that's very interesting, because I think it was one of my students who, if that's the same group that calls themselves the followers of Set, I think that was brought to my attention a couple of years ago. So, yeah, I think there's a Sufi proverb that goes something to the effect of there wouldn't be such a thing as counterfeit gold if there were no such thing as real gold.
Exactly,
so,
yeah.
In other words, there wouldn't be the motivation to create a mass-market consumer replica of something that was difficult to attain or even maybe fully comprehend to the mainstream. But obviously there's a demand and a desire for these kinds of things, but the motivation and maybe the understanding for what it really is somewhat different from what we're doing. Obviously, what we're doing is in the true religious and mystical tradition. So, first of all, I guess I should explain the Settian Liberation Movement and what its meaning is. It's called Settian Liberation Movement. The words themselves form an acronym that means SLM. It means Salam. And this is the ancient Egyptian Afro-Semitic word for peace. It's also the Hebraic and Arabic origins of those languages' words for shalom and salam. So in the Settian Liberation Movement, we have various practices that we undergo, and these are initiatory practices that we do on a daily basis, and therefore specific goals of liberation. So that's why the word liberation is incorporated in our name. But it's also not a group to be joined in an organizational sense. So unlike a role-playing game or a membership organization that you apply for and you pay a fee and you get a card and you have an identity and you have something to show your friends and you've got something, with a sticker and a label or something. It's not like that. This is about action. It's about practice. It's about transcendence of certain conditioning and behaviors and things that are meant to change your consciousness so that gets back to what the liberation is all about. So when we say Settian Liberation Movement, Set is the God that obviously is our patron and that we are applying ourselves to as a vehicle for our liberation. Liberation, we have to clarify, is not in the sense of liberation from worldly things. It's not liberation from the credit card debts. It's not liberation from your mother nagging you to do the dishes, even if you're 30 years old and still in university and still living at home. It's not liberation even from legitimate social repression or political tyranny. It's not liberation from a bad relationship. It's not liberation in any way from worldly affairs that you understand in that sense. What we mean by liberation is the attainment of liberation from all attachment in a mental comprehension of in terms of conditioning, addictions, cravings, fears, pains, worries, all of these things. So we have to understand that we're talking about liberation in the spiritual sense of meaning.
Gotcha.
I don't think people who are participating in a role-playing game, I don't think that's their aim. So I think that, on the contrary, they are participating in more acquirement of attachments. So that's why it's, I think, the polar opposite of what we're talking about. Now, also, there's a phrase called spiritual materialism, which a well-known Tibetan Buddhist sage Chogyam Trungpa coined, and it means really attachment to these kinds of things. They're using gods as a means of sort of making toys and attachment to all these kinds of, using these mystical things as turning it into a kind of materialism in and of itself. And that's fine, but we have to be clear about what the difference is. So actually, one might think that I would think, oh, that's an interesting and fascinating thing that they're doing this with Set, which is my god as well. But actually, it's just no different from any other kind of popular entertainment. It just so happens to be with the god that I revere. So what? I mean, it doesn't mean anything one way or the other to me. But I just have to make it clear that in no way could be perceived as the same thing as a religious phenomenon, which is what we are doing. So I don't know if that makes that any clearer about what we're doing in terms of spiritual liberation.
Right. Well, I think a lot of it, as far as these role-playing games, probably comes from the use in fantasy fiction, like Robert E. Howard and the Conan, we mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I think Conan was, in that regard, it was a different deal. I mean, I know everyone's seen the movie where James Earl Jones turns into a giant snake.
Yeah. We can shapeshift, too, when we develop our CDs well enough. But, again, developing the CDs isn't the goal of what we're doing, but it is an indicator that we're getting somewhere on our path to liberation.
Now, when you say shapeshift, what does that exactly mean?
Well, shapeshifting, that's something that, again, as I said, we can develop that. It's the ability to, again, this requires the ability to transcend your attachments and in particular, your ego attachments to identity, to who you are. If you can get over your attachment to your labeling of yourself and your identity, you're cherishing your identity, I should say, you can be virtually anybody. You can slip in and out of different shells and even different animal forms or deity forms. And in fact, in tantric practice, that is part of what you have to do, is you have to slip into the deity form. And you must envision yourself and become the deity. So you can no longer be the human anymore. You have to become the deity. But that means revering yourself as the deity and no longer being you, the human being, or the ego attachment to you, the small, limited being that you know yourself to be, but actually taking on the embodiment of the more omniscient and all-knowing deity.
Is this a spiritual thing you're talking about?
Yes, definitely.
Do you alter your physical being, or is it
Well,
just...
that does happen.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, this gets into the secret teachings, actually, because in the secret teachings, then there are things that can transform, yes.
So there was a little bit of truth in what Robert E. Howard was writing there.
Well, yes, except for I don't think he was speaking from experience.
Right.
Yes.
It's like he knew a little bit about it.
I can tell you from my own experience, and this is stone cold sober, by the way, not on any kind of chemical enhancements or anything, that there are experiences that you can have through meditative practices with another person that you are taking on deity forms and you are transforming, yes.
Wow, that's pretty crazy.
That's through meditative practices where and this takes years of training and years of mental work in terms of very precise, specific meditative practices, and through the training of a master or a guru who knows what they're doing to guide you. Again, I have to say, just for the entertainment of seeing transformation is not the goal or the point.
Right.
It is only that may happen, that is an indicator that you are achieving some degree, some maybe glimpse, window into that you are getting somewhere on your path to liberation and ultimate enlightenment.